Well, it's that time again. It's time to talk about that new, more powerful Nintendo Switch and E3.
Think for yourself. Question authority.
So yeah, about that new Nintendo Switch. It keeps getting more updates as we go along, and we have another one coming from Nikkei, our favorite place to talk about, of course, with new Nintendo Switch information, all the way dating back to 2019. They talked about this new, more powerful Switch coming. In fact, they called it a next generation Switch back when it was first talked about in those early days back then in 2019. We were calling it the Switch Pro, and Nikkei was in fact the first ones to actually call it a next-gen Switch. Now, they're back again with a report saying that Nintendo was preparing a higher model of the Nintendo Switch, more powerful, better graphics, and Nintendo is also up their forecast, of course, to 30 million total Switch consoles sold for this coming fiscal year that they're going to be talking about this week, actually. Now, usually, as we've been chronicling the information with this new Switch, what Nintendo does is that they deny until they are basically ready to announce this new console, and then things start getting really suspicious, which is what we've been seeing for the past 6 to 8, 9, 10 months, actually since 2020, since 2019 even. They've been hinting and talking about new technologies and talking about new hardware, and continually to talk about new hardware for their developers and for their new ideas they have to make new consoles. Furukawa has been very vocal on talking about new hardware recently, in the last few months even. This report that we have from Nikkei, of course, is not anything surprising. We expected this. In fact, we expected this thing to be announced this year at some point very soon, possibly around E3, maybe even at E3 itself, which you don't want to rule out yet, because we'll discuss that in a bit, but you don't want to rule that out. But first of all, let's get into this information from Nikkei. This comes by way of translation and kind of sifting through some things of the information from Video Games Chronicle. And let's take a look at what it says. And here it talks about how Nikkei notes that the 30 million shipped figure that they heard about is dependent on development in the current global semiconductor shortage, which has affected all consumers' electronic industries during the pandemic. The company, Nintendo they're talking about, has approached a number of parts makers about increasing production, Nikkei reports. And they go on to say several officials admitted to us that they are considering expanding production. The company is also expected to add a higher-end model with higher image quality. This will be the first additional model of the Switch since the Nintendo Switch Lite, which was released in September 2019 and made it more portable. But here is the key point brought out by Nintendo themselves from a spokesman from Nintendo when they were approached and asked about this new, more powerful Switch. Here's what they replied with. They said, "There is nothing we can tell you about production numbers and higher-end models." So they went right there and said that basically there's nothing else they can say at this point about new Switch models coming and production numbers as far as what they're going to be doing internally. They didn't deny that there was a new Switch coming, and of course they continued to be tight-lipped and just basically not give a yes or no answer like they should. But this is just even more fuel to the fire basically, because as we know, this new Switch has been reported on continually over and over and over again. And now they're not really denying it's happening, and they're basically saying, well, we can't tell you about it right now. That's what they're saying, really. They didn't say it right now, but they said there's nothing we can tell you about higher end models. So they simply, either have the information and they can't talk about it, which of course makes sense because they have to announce the device first and they don't want to hurt sales, yada, yada, yada. We know how Nintendo works with their hardware. They're never going to announce a console just from some random journalist or a question and answer session from a website asking them, hey, by the way, do you have a new Switch coming? They're going to say, well, we can't talk about that. Or if it wasn't coming for real, they would say, no, we have nothing coming at all. We only have the Switch. But of course, they haven't been doing that for the past year or so, haven't been talking like that. They've been basically saying, well, we're not going to talk about that right now, or we don't have nothing to say right now. We're always working on new hardware. So yes, basically that is a yes. They do have something coming. It's obvious, plain as day. It's just a matter of them announcing at this point. So this new, more powerful Switch, that is the big question in everyone's mind. When will they announce this new Switch to be released for the holidays? Because that's when the rumor and reports have been talking about is holiday 2021, around September through November time range, that Nintendo would release this more powerful Switch model to further boost sales and of course get new games. Because part of that rumor, by the way, and reports, was that it would have exclusive games running on this new Switch, right? That would basically be like AAA third-party games, what we're getting at here. We know Nintendo's probably not going to have too many exclusive first-party games on this new Switch. They may have one, maybe one or two, who knows, but basically they're talking about AAA third-party games. So that brings up the question about E3. E3 is really exciting, right? Because E3 is coming back. It's been gone since 2019 due to the last year and everything that happened last year with the pandemic. So here we have E3 coming back finally. And Nintendo has a big opportunity here, not just for themselves. Nintendo has their own Nintendo Directs. They can showcase anything they want, but E3 is a huge stage. So if they have exclusive games from AAA third party, games like Devil May Cry 5, like these past games that they weren't getting on the current Nintendo Switch, and new games coming out as well, like Resident Evil Village, for example, which would be a huge game to get. The easier it is to port a game, the less it costs for them to port it over, is basically what the deal is here. Same applies for Square Enix and their whole slate of games they have to port over to Nintendo. There's a lot of money to be made by these AAA third parties, and of course all the new games, and quite possibly Call of Duty. Battlefield is being talked about as Battlefield 6 coming out soon. There's all kinds of games that Nintendo has missed out on. As we know very clearly, there's a certain type of audience that the Switch has catered to a lot, but a lot of that is due to because the Switch typically can't run a lot of these games, because the games that it does happen to run do very well, like The Witcher 3, Doom 2016, Doom Eternal, Mortal Kombat 11. Those games aren't necessarily made for the Switch, but they were able to port them over and they did sell very well. So E3 is a big stage this year, and Nintendo themselves, Doug Bowser, talked about how Nintendo is going to be at E3. So if they are going to be pushing new hardware at E3 or this year later on, either way, of course, they're going to be showing it in some kind of showcase with these new games. But a lot of these developers would love and actually probably push Nintendo or even ask Nintendo to showcase their games for this new Switch at E3, if at all possible, if the console was ready to show. Now, this is different from the Switch Lite. Now, I know a lot of people have said, no, Nintendo doesn't reveal hardware at E3, or they don't reveal hardware in Nintendo Directs. Now, of course, that is kind of true in recent times, but E3, they have always revealed new hardware at E3, especially brand new consoles that run brand new games that aren't on the previous console, which would be pretty much what this is for this new Switch. So we had 2004, we had the Nintendo DS and Project Revolution, which was later the Wii, which was announced in 2004 along with the DS. Then, of course, in I think it was 2010, the 3DS was announced at E3, and then following year, the Wii U was announced at E3, and which released the following year. Now, them announcing and releasing same year, they did that in 2004 with the DS. They announced it at E3 and they released it the holiday of 2004. So E3 is a nice time for other parties involved to showcase their games. Nintendo could announce their hardware at any time they want. It's not necessarily about E3 for Nintendo, but it's more about timing and how it all fits in their marketing campaign. So that remains to be seen, guys. So that's why I don't want anyone to rule out E3 as when they will actually be revealing this new Switch along with a bunch of games. Like hit you hard, hit you fast, and get things rolling basically, and get pre-orders going. E3 would be a really exciting time to do that in. But like I said, the reason why it would make sense is due to AAA third-party support being big, quite possibly on this new Switch. That's one scenario. If Nintendo does not reveal this new Switch at E3, they have a ton of other things they could reveal on the current Switch. Things like Bayonetta 3, and Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, and Metroid Prime 4, Metroid Prime Trilogy. They have a bunch of stuff they could show on the current Switch if they don't want to reveal this new Switch at E3. So it depends on what their timing is, like I said, but those possibilities are basically right there for the taking for Nintendo. It's been kind of a slow year, but things are starting to pick up with PlayStation. They just released Returnal, which was just released a few days ago, and it's a very good game, by the way. If you have a PS5, I highly suggest you pick it up. And they're going to be releasing in June Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, which looks amazing. They're taking some cues there from Pixar and of course from Nintendo with the platforming stuff, and they got it nailed. You know, that game looks basically like the best graphics I've ever seen in a game. A lot of people do agree that is the case. Now, Sony will start to be picking up steam, and they of course announced they're not going to be at E3, so that leaves a big gaping hole for Nintendo to fill, along with Microsoft at E3 to announce some big games and of course maybe new hardware for Nintendo. Sony most likely will have their event either after E3 or before E3, but probably after is my guess. But Sony is going to have quite a bit of games to show, of course. They already have Ratchet and Clank coming. They're going to be having God of War Ragnarok to show. They're going to have Horizon Forbidden West to show. They have a lot of huge AAA first-party IPs that they can go to generate a lot of hype on their platform. And Nintendo, of course, has this opportunity to take a lot of that spotlight away from PlayStation and their new PlayStation 5 by doing what? Announcing their new console, their new Switch, with new games and upgraded graphics and fidelity and frame rates, and have it be portable, of course, with the upgraded screen. All those things are very exciting for Nintendo to do, and the best way to do it, of course, is on the big stage. If you have a big stage and opportunity to do so, this might be the opportunity that Nintendo does, in fact, reveal this new Switch at E3. Remember also as well, in previous interviews, years past, Nintendo has said they won't, completely shy away from E3 completely in the future. Of course, they've always had digital events since 2012 or so, and that's fine. But I don't expect anything different here as far as digital events. But as far as making a big boom presence at E3, I wouldn't count Nintendo out here to have a huge presence at E3. Their last big E3, in my opinion, like big one, where they would just hit it out of the park on absolutely everything, was either 2017 where they announced Metroid Prime 4, or in 2014 when they showed Breath of the Wild for the first time on the Wii U. That was like an amazing E3 presentation in 2014. Most Nintendo fans agree. So they have a huge opportunity here. There's a lot of games that are waiting to be shown, like we talked about before. The Bayonettas, the Metroid Primes, the Zeldas. And they have exciting new hardware they could be showing as well. PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, they're just coming into their second holiday. They're going to be having a lot more things to show, more games to show for the future as well. So you can count on Nintendo, to be there as well, showing what they got. And now is the perfect time for them to show that new hardware. There's no reason to wait really at all. There's no reason to wait till July or August. Might as well just show it now and get people excited and get people to pre-order it. So don't rule it out, guys. Never say never with Nintendo. Like, they never do that, because they do that. They do the unexpected. Just when you think they're going to do something that you expect, they do the opposite of that. It's been the case for Nintendo for many, many years, as you're probably well aware yourself. So don't expect something so predictable for Nintendo this year, because things just might be a little bit different. And as far as Metroid Prime is concerned, Metroid Prime 4, they have a really good chance of showing that this year at E3. The way that development of that game is going, I'm going to talk about it in another video probably as well, but that game is close, guys. Close to the end of its development. I don't care what anyone else says out there in YouTube land. You guys know who've been following me, how close we've been following this game. That game is close. That game is really close. Believe it or not, now's not the time to be pessimistic about Metroid Prime 4. In my opinion, as time moves forward, it's only going to be time to be more and more excited about Metroid Prime 4. And E3 just might be the time for when we see that game. Also, on a side note, if you're watching this video here to the end, you're probably a big fan of mine, of course. Been watching the channel for a while. I do want to announce that we are going to have a Metroid Prime event, another event for Metroid on this channel. It's going to be an entire day dedicated to Metroid Prime. I'll announce more details about it coming up in not too distant future. But if you recall, we did one last year in 2020. I believe it was in May, I think, where we played the entire game of Super Metroid. I had a little retrospective of it. It was like a 6-hour event. So you can expect something kind of similar with that here. I'm going to announce the game, of course, coming up that we're going to be displaying. It's going to be really, really fun. I hope you guys do look forward to that. Again, details on that coming up later, so stay tuned. All right, guys, this is exciting stuff with Nintendo. We got a new Switch coming. We have E3 coming. We have a bunch of games coming, a bunch of announcements coming very soon, probably in June. It's going to get really heated up a lot, so look forward to that. And Metroid Prime 4 very, very soon. All right, guys. Hope you did enjoy this video. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe for more, and I'll talk to you very soon in the next video. Have a great day.